Greetings to you all fellow travelers. This is Grotnip, welcoming you back to the logbook of a simple Lindworm traveler. Today's episode is meant to be more or less a partner to the one I did the last time around, since today's topic of discussion, Eskold the Executioner, is one of the few options that we can actually attach to the Warcrow unit. So let's start again by discussing who is Eskold the Executioner. As those familiar with the source material already know, each Varang of the northern tribes has an animal spirit living inside them, and this spirit is awakened in the ceremony in which the young Varang reaches adulthood and becomes a full-fledged member of their tribe. The Varangs can then start to learn and familiarize themselves with the totem animal that has been awakened, and they can draw power from this animal via their special tattoo. And the animal in question will impart part of their strength and abilities to the Varang who carries it. So Varangs with Arctic fox totems are sly. Polar bear totem Varangs can be more powerful, and apparently snow leopard tattooed Varangs are more dexterous. But Eskold the Executioner is different because his totem animal was revealed to be the feared and loathed Varg. The Varangs consider the Vargs of Lindworm to be emissaries of death and destruction, and they avoid them when possible. So having this animal to be revealed to be Eskold's totem animal was quite scandalous at the time. This left Eskold in the unenviable position of being shunned by his people for no particular fault of his own. But luckily for him, the emerging alliance with the orcs made his life that easier, since the orcs hold a kind of special kinship with the wargs, and thus with Eskold's close relation with the wild wargs came the improved relations with the orcs also. And while the Varangs shunned Eskold for his affinity with these beasts, the orcs valued and honored him for it, and thus he found himself more at home with orcs at times than with his own people. It would appear, however, that when the battle horns are sounded, Eskold is welcomed back to the ranks of the Varangs, and they accept him as their leader, as he wields his terrifying scythe of the Executioner to smite the enemies of the northern tribes. And with that rather dramatic a opening, let's get to the basic stats of Eskold the Executioner. Once again, this is the top half of his card, taken from the amazing Warcrow army builder that's been upkept by fans of the game. At 30 points, Eskold is on the expensive side when it comes to the Northern Tribes characters, especially when we consider the fact that, as we are going to be seeing, he's a support type character and not an officer, some of the time at least. So getting to include him in your company isn't an easy exercise, and there is a hefty opportunity cost involved. So I think he's not a type of model to be thrown in willy-nilly, but rather he's something to be added with a specific purpose in mind. As is tradition by now for Northern Tribes characters, Eskold brings a single command token to the party. So he can help you advance your total tally of command tokens to a level in which you can compete against some opponents when it comes to the initiative roll, and also he can help fuel the command skills of your company. although you do have to keep in mind that Eskold himself has quite a powerful command skill on him, so it might not be a bad idea to earmark this command token for his own use. Then again, I have been playing quite a lot with companies in which each character only brings a single command token, and I have had no problem making my tokens last until the end of the game. So if you are a little conservative and careful with your selection of times when to utilize these tokens, I think you should be just fine also. At a 4-3 movement and a 10 strike charge, we are talking about very box standard Varang movement values over here. 4-3 means that Eskold is quite a fleet of foot model, so he can position for the maximum effect on the battlefield should he be fighting alone at some point. And the 10 strike charge should enable him to take the charge against most targets that are going to be coming his way. When it comes to the wounds characteristic, the Executioner is quite beefy a piece since he's packing 4 wounds, which is rather uncommon for the Varang characters that we have seen so far. When it comes to Eskold psychological performance, while the orange and the yellow dice on willpower are pretty much what you usually get for single characters of the Northern Tribes, the moral value of 1 is really going to be restricting the amount of damage the Executioner can do by himself. And as we are going to be seeing, I think this is a good and downright necessary design choice, since Eskold, even as a single model, has quite a tremendous upside if things go his way, so getting to activate him over and over again during a round might prove problematic under certain circumstances. And this moral value of 1 more or less guides the Northern Tribes players into using him in a more of a pun intended supportive way. As a named Varang character, obviously there can only ever be 1 Eskold in your company. Interestingly enough, Eskold can not only join Varang infantry units, as is par for the course for these types of characters usually, but also he is capable of joining the Warcrow riders. So as of the taping of this video, Eskold is one of the only 2 models capable of joining the Warcrow riders. So if you are looking forward to maximizing the effectiveness or at least maximizing the battlefield output of your Warcrow riders, then you do need to consider whether adding Eskold to one of your units might be worthwhile. I think this is really a cool design choice, and I like the idea of Eskold running along with the wolves, his scythe carried on his shoulder or something, and then the whole group charging the enemies to lay waste to them. The last keyword on Eskold's card is quite a peculiar one, since he has access to the Scout ability. This is interesting because if you attach Eskold to a unit that does not scout, you actually lose access to this ability. And then again, if you attach him to a unit that does scout, like let's say the Tundra Marauders, you don't need to have the keyword yourself in order to make use of the special deployment conditions. So effectively this all means that Eskold can only ever get mileage out of this ability if he is ran solo at the start of the game. And while I don't consider Eskold to be a prime candidate for a model that I would include just to act as a solo scout, as we are going to be seeing, there are potential upsides in using him in this way. And I like the idea that this scout keyword reinforces the possibility of a Northern Tribes player including Eskold the Executioner in their company without having a and strict plan on where and how to utilize him. You could potentially have a unit of Varang infantry that you could be attaching the Executioner to. You could also have a unit of Warc Riders as your second option, and then there is the third option of actually scouting in with the solo version of Eskold the Executioner. So with these two units included and the potential for Eskold to fight at it alone as a forward element, you would have the tactical flexibility of choosing which approach to take at the beginning of the battle, and that's not half a bad a choice to have. Which leads us to the question, why would I have a expensive 30-point model with only a single morale scout close to the enemy lines? Well, the attack breakdown of Eskold the Executioner is pretty much why. For a 30-point support, quote-unquote support option, Eskold's attack potential is downright terrifying. He averages 5 effective damage per attack and he has the potential for as much as 10. And if he's pushing for extra performance, his average goes up to whopping 7 and his potential goes to the absolutely mind-bending 11 damage. This potential is why I consider it necessary for the Executioner to have such a low moral value, because there could be situations where a scouted or charging out of unit Eskold might be able to rip into several enemy units with terrifying consequences if there wasn't that low moral value keeping him back from doing so. If we break down from which components this rather tremendous offensive potential comes from, there is obviously going to be a good baseline of successes. With 2 orange dice, a red and a yellow one, you are averaging 3 with the potential of 5 successes, and stressing EA pushing for extra performance grants an additional automatic success to Eskold's attack. Eskold also has a nice double special switch ability that allows him to cancel blocks from the enemy's defense roll, which means that you can help brute force your successes through thusly. So with the dice set available, Eskold is producing on average 2 specials, which should enable him to trigger this ability at least once, and there is the high potential for 5 specials. If you choose to stress for extra performance, then you are already halfway there, since Eskold is going to be getting access to a single solid special just from the pushing also. The most noteworthy part of Eskold's offensive potential, however, is his tremendously powerful hollow success switch. With a red dice, double orange and a yellow, there is more than a 50-50 of a chance of Eskold triggering the switch once per attack, and if you are charging, obviously this grants you access to a reroll that can help fish for this result that you are looking for. This hollow special switch trigger causes the enemy to suffer automatically 2 wounds per hollow success spent. So Eskold has potential for inflicting as many as 8 wounds, bypassing the enemy's block-based defenses entirely. Yes, you are extremely unlikely to roll several hollow successes on your attacks. Tell that to my dice when I'm rolling with a unit that doesn't have access to a switch like this. But all the same, enemies that are relying on high block scores are going to be really nervous around Eskold for this automatic wound infliction potential, and especially high value targets that rely on defenses rather than a high wound total to survive the attacks should be really scared. A double hollow success on Eskold should be enough to wipe out most characters from the face of the game table, unless there is some defense beyond their potentially excellent block totals there to save them. Then again, one has to remember that when automatic wound infliction is part of the damage potential of a unit, that doesn't always turn out to mean that there is more total damage, but rather that there is more assured damage involved. And what I mean by this is that if part of your dice roll is, for example, in this case, spent or you're rolling hollow successes and then you are spending them to inflict automatic wounds, the problem then becomes that you have rolled less normal successes on the rest of your dice, which means that there is higher a likelihood that the enemy has enough block symbols to block out all the traditional damage that you would be inflicting, and so the automatic wounds become instead of rather than in addition to element of your damage infliction. If Eskold's offense breakdown was rather long and complex and effort, his defense breakdown is going to be nothing of the sort. Rolling just 2 blue and 2 black dice with absolutely no switches means that Eskold is averaging only single A block per defense roll, even though he does have the technical high ceiling of as many as 4 blocks available. 4 dice rolled also means that the situations where he's rolling no blocks at all should be rather rare, since you should be hitting one of those dice most of the time. The lack of any additional defensive kit means, however, that with the low average block total and the inability to mitigate damage in any other way, Eskold is going to be leaning on that wounds characteristic of 4 to survive for any extended period of time, and as those familiar with the game already know, wounds attribute is a resource that when you start spending it, it becomes less valuable, since you can't respend those wounds unless you find a way to heal, for in this instance Eskold with the tattooist or some such measure. The only other notable thing about Eskold's defensive performance is his access to a single red push modifier that can allow him to counter attack, averaging a single success and having the potential for 2. But again, this counter-attacking performance is entirely success-based, so it is susceptible to mitigation by enemies who are capable of adding or producing blocks with their offensive rolls. The last thing to discuss about Eskold's solo performance is his rather dreadful sounding command skill, Scythe of the Executioner. As a command skill, Eskold has to pay a command token in order to access this ability, and it is triggered when Eskold engages with or is engaged by an enemy unit. So there is a particular timing at which you have to choose to apply or not apply this skill. What the Scythe of the Executioner does is that it automatically imposes the frightened state upon the enemy that's engaging or being engaged by Eskold, or as we are going to be seeing, the unit that he's attached to. Obviously, frightened is quite a powerful ability that helps your units break enemies or otherwise lessen their psychological performance, but at the same time it is an ability, or rather a state that is entirely neutered by the fearless keyword. So you need to keep an eye out for fearless enemy units, since the effect of this command skill is greatly reduced against them. In addition to the automatic infliction of the frightened state, the Scythe of the Executioner will also enforce a point of stress upon the enemy unit should Eskold or the unit he is attached to inflict any damage on them during the combat resulting from the beginning of the engagement that was the cause for activation of Scythe of the Executioner. Well, I really couldn't have explained that more in a more complicated turn of phrase, but let's forge on nonetheless. The important part here when it comes to whether you can access this additional point of stress is that since both Eskold's solo profile and his attached profile have access to ways of inflicting automatic wounds on the enemy has only limited ways of stopping this damage and thus stress from flowing in. So the Northern Tribes player should, under most circumstances, be rather safe in the knowledge that activating Scythe of the Executioner will not only inflict that frightened state, but also cause that extra point of stress to be implied. What's important about this ability as a whole is that while it's a far from reliable a thing, all in all, getting to deal damage even with your automatic successes and then having the result force a willpower test upon the enemy and then the enemy failing that willpower test even with frightened, there are a lot of things that need to go right for you, but at the same time, if these things do pan out, this ability can be tremendously powerful. Scythe of the Executioner is one of the few ways in which a Northern Tribes unit by itself can inflict several points of stress on an enemy they are fighting without the enemy having anything to say about that. I'm choosing to not include the idea of enemy unit resisting being pushed back and enduring a stress, since that's a mechanic that's accessible for everyone and that gives agency to your enemy to decide whether they want to suffer that extra point of stress or not. But if Eskold is winning a combat that he's part of or his unit is doing so and Scythe of the Executioner has been activated, then the enemy will be suffering a point of stress from the fact that they just lost a combat and another from this command skill. And this has the potential for forcing that over morale willpower test even against units that were not full on stress at the beginning of the combat. And what's further, I think, even more powerful is the fact that if you are engaging a unit that's already full on stress and you get to win them and you get to apply the extra stress from Scythe of the Executioner, then you are putting the enemy unit at the tremendously vulnerable position of having to try and pass that willpower test with 2 successes or break and flee, with rerolls on any successful dice unless they are frightened due to the fact that you were able to apply the state. Also remember that the extra stress infliction is not contingent on you having actually imposed a frightened state. So Scythe of the Executioner can be made use of against fearless units also, and in the case of fearless units that are already full on stress, it might actually be worthwhile to do so from time to time. Lastly, a thing that I really value about this ability when it comes to it being used as a way of breaking enemy units and forcing them to flee, that unlike the spirit of Thermapleurus, the Scythe of the Executioner allows you to attack your enemy first and break them after, which means that you get to eat your cake and save it too. getting to cash in both the attack and the resulting, hopefully good for you, morale effect. Whereas with the powerful Spirit of the Thermopleurus at its full augmented version, you only get to access the morale effect, and afterwards the enemy should be fleeing, so you essentially lose your chance to attack. Let's talk about the attached profile of Eskold the Executioner next. The first thing of note, and something that I already quickly glossed over earlier, is the fact that technically Eskold is a support type character. I'm saying technically because of his passive ability Varrank Leader, which means that should Eskold join a unit of Varrank infantry, he will essentially become an officer for the purposes of that unit attachment, that unit combo, which effectively bypasses the problems of being a support, meaning that Eskold will be the last model to be removed, so he will essentially detach from the unit once the unit gets wiped out around him. This isn't quite as amazing as it may sound, however, since the low morale value of the Executioner will essentially mean that if and when the unit gets wiped out around him, Eskold will be full on stress or potentially even in excess stress, which may see this warrior flee the field of battle rather than stick it out when things go tough and wrong for his unit. If you are not attaching Eskold to a Varrank unit, but rather you are either attaching him to the Warcrow Riders, or you are choosing to try and leverage the War Alliance ability and thus attaching him to a Orc unit, Orc infantry unit that is, then the support tag or support type becomes a problem. Since as a support character you can never remove Eskold as the last casualty, and he will fall at the very latest as the second last model of the unit, which will essentially see your 30-point potential destruction machine get picked out of the field, just like a Warcrow Rider or in the worst case an Orc Hunter would. So essentially, War Alliance does offer diminishing returns when you are fielding Eskold, and I would consider it to be highly unorthodox to use him in any other units except with Varrank infantry or the Warcrow Riders that he is naturally able to join. The leadership qualities of Eskold are a rather mixed bag. He enforces his willpower of a orange and a yellow on the unit he is joining. So for most Varrank infantry units, this is going to be an improvement, but not for all. And same can be said for the Orc units that he can join with the access to War Alliance. As the Warcrow Riders only have a single orange dice, you are getting value out of this extra willpower when attaching to them all the time. The Executioner also provides the unit with a point of morale, which is really important, especially for the morale 1 Warcrow Riders, but unfortunately he does not increase the conquest value of the unit, which can be quite problematic, since this means that if you have Eskold attached to a unit with only a single point of conquest, enemies can then simply move a unit with 2 or more conquest into the same objective that you are attempting to guard or take, and muscle you out on conquest alone without actually having to face the fearsome combatant that is Eskold and his unit. Eskold's attached version also maintains access to full form version of Scythe of the Executioner, so everything that I talked about when I was talking about the command skill as part of Eskold's solo profile is also entirely applicable here. The last unique ability that Eskold the Executioner provides the attached unit of theirs is the passive skill Warg Totem. And this ability simply grants the elite keyword to the executioner's unit. At face value, this seems extremely powerful. Elite is one of the stronger keywords in the game, and the ability to change any hollow symbols into solid symbols of the type can prove extremely powerful under the right circumstances. But as you are going to be seeing, the value gained from the effects of elite varies greatly from dice to dice and also from unit to unit, so it pays to keep a sober head when analyzing the importance of the Vark totem on the various units that can have access to it via having Eskold join them. As you can see from this small breakdown I have put down here, the red and the green dice will only have a single die facing of theirs that will be affected by applying elite. You will get a single additional success out of all your 8 facings for a red attack dice and a single block for those 8 facings on the defensive dice. And since neither of these dice include any hollow specials, there is no additional benefit to be gained for fishing when it comes to fishing for solid special symbols for empowering switch abilities. When it comes to the orange and the yellow dice and their respective counterparts in the defensive department, that is the blue and the black dice, then we see a more notable benefit when it comes to the total amount of symbols gained. And in these instances, we see the most value being gained in the increase of special symbols by turning hollow specials into solids when it comes to the orange and the blue dice, and the most performance increase when it comes to the primary symbols we are rolling, that is successes and blocks, when we are talking about the least powerful dice, that is the yellow and the black one respectively. It must be said at this point that the willpower effect of this upgrade should not be overlooked when talking about Eskold, since his willpower roll or his willpower characteristic that he enforces upon his unit does indeed include a yellow dice and an orange dice. So you do get quite some value out of this psychological performance increase due to elite. For other units, the mileage will vary quite a lot, as you can see. And if we are, for example, talking about attaching Eskold to a unit of Vark Riders, as you can see, the red dice, that is the majority, 75% in fact, of the offensive dice of the Vark Riders, that does not get all that much out of this elite keyword. And what's even more troublesome than the fact that there is only a slight increase in the effective success value is the fact that Eskold does not increase the likelihood of gaining any specials on those red dice, which is quite damning in and of itself, because that means that Eskold is not actually helping the unit access its special switch ability or the one granted by Eskold himself. Which leads us nicely to the last thing that I think one needs to consider when employing the Vark totem, and that is what switch abilities the unit in question already has access to. If the unit already has access to a good solid special switch, the end result of attaching Eskold to them may be a net increase in the amount of specials that you are gaining, yes, but at the same time you are having to choose between 2 competing special switches in the one that Eskold brings and the one that the unit already has access to. In addition to this, if your unit has a powerful hollow special switch, that is for example the case with the skin changers, you really aren't going to be changing those hollow specials for solid ones via elite. So essentially any value to be gained here by having elite is going to be lost. So yes, elite is a powerful ability, especially when it comes to the psychological performance of the unit and potentially for its defensive benefits. But when it comes to the offensive side of things, it may not be as powerful as it might seem at face value. Also remember that as a support character when it comes to orc units like Warcriders, Eskold's support tag kicks in and you lose access to this elite once Eskold goes down. So that's 30 points and elite down the drain at that point, I'm afraid. Eskold does empower the offensive performance of their unit. Beyond granting the elite keyword, he adds a single solid success to the unit's attack roll, in melee that is, and also a melee attack switch. That is a double special that inflicts an automatic wound upon the target. This switch ability is particularly important since it allows you to bypass any really high block rolls that your opponent is trying to leverage against you in order to push that wound through for the secondary effect of Scythe of the Executioner to be applied, so keep that one in mind. At the same time, as already stated, while Elite can indeed help you empower this ability, it can also end up being the case that you are competing with your unit's natural switch ability, so take this into consideration when choosing what units to attach Eskold to. Unfortunately, Eskold does not provide any offensive push modifier to their unit, so what the unit has naturally is what they have to work with in this category. When it comes to the attached profiles, defense performance increase, there is practically none. Eskold does not bring any switch abilities, additional defensive dice or symbols to their roll. He simply adds a rather weakish push modifier that allows the unit to add a single success to their defense roll, and all the problems that I talked about earlier when it comes to putting a small amount of successes to a defense roll apply here also. Then again, the Vark totem can turn out to be quite a powerful defensive upgrade, especially when black dice are involved in the defense roll, so that's nothing to overlook in this department either. Okay, let's end this episode with a final analysis on Eskold. I find Eskold to be a model of extremely high ceiling and extremely low a floor of performance. When everything breaks his way, solo fighting Eskold skites his way through way more powerful and way more expensive enemies by accessing multitudes of his extremely powerful double automatic wound inflicting switch, and units led by him overwhelm their enemies while passing their willpower tests and taking little damage in return thanks to his elite keyword. But then again, there are going to be times when you don't get those switches triggered when fighting solo, and Eskold fails to take out their target before being full on stress or going down himself, and the unit that he has been attached to fails to make meaningful get meaningful value out of having elite, and thus the Executioner is simply yet another model in the unit, a 30-point model of the unit that goes down just like one of his companions. This means that Eskold should probably be a sometimes food rather than all-time food, but at the same time he does have access to a plug and play psychological offense element in his Guide of the Executioner ability, which means that any Northern Tribes list can have access to a potentially game-changing an ability, situationally game-changing an ability that is via the chance to inflict several points of stress, frightened, and thus break enemy units. So keep this possibility in mind when constructing your companies going forward. Okay, that's all I have to say on Eskold for the time being, although I'm sure we will be revisiting the subject at some point in some form. For now, it's time for me to hope that you all have safe travels, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye for now.